So Governor DeSantis is expected to announce his 2024 presidential bid on Wednesday, May 24th. And this has really been a long time coming. For months I've said it's very likely, if not almost certain, that Ron DeSantis was going to announce a bid for the presidency. All signs have indicated that in the last couple of months. You know, he's been doing his book tour in various battleground and swing states. He's been promoting the Florida blueprint, which really highlights his policy victories in the state of Florida. And, you know, his profile nationally has been raised considerably since COVID and really after the midterms, especially given his near 20-point landslide in a state that was once the purplest of purple states in the union. So, of course, we're going to talk about where DeSantis currently sits in Republican primary polling, what his path to victory would be in the Republican primary, and ultimately what his chances are at winning the primary, and ultimately then what his strategy would be for both the primary and the general elections, and what his path to victory could look like in November of 2024. So we're going to get into all of that in just a second, but first, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing down below and liking this video if you enjoy. So anyway, this has been a long time coming, as I mentioned before. I've been saying for months that DeSantis was going to jump in this race. It's really his moment, I think, because if he is to become the nominee for the Republican Party, it would be in 2024. I think if Ron DeSantis had chose to run in 2028, yeah, it's possible he would have had the nomination locked up, but it's also possible he would have ended up like Kristi, who was somebody who ran way past his prime and ultimately garnered little to no support in the grand scheme of things. So I think DeSantis is playing his cards right by running now, especially since Donald Trump is vulnerable. Although we're going to take a look at some of the polling in just a minute. So far, Trump is dominating the primary field, leading the average by, I think, 36 points. So while it is very difficult, it's not impossible for Ron DeSantis to win the nomination. So we're going to take a look at those polls in just a sec. But I really think that this would be DeSantis's best opportunity. I mean, his profile is really never going to get higher than it is right now. I mean, he really made a name for himself during COVID. And of course, especially after the midterms, many Republicans look to him as the future of the party as opposed to Donald Trump. You know, his victory in Florida really contrasted how Republicans and really how Trump's candidates did all across the country. So if we take a look at the primary polls, as I mentioned, Ron DeSantis is down 37 points on RCP, 32 points in FiveThirtyEight. Overall, he's down about 35 percentage points. So he's down pretty big. But he's the only candidate that polls consistently in the teens and 20s against Donald Trump. No other candidate comes even close. And this really isn't something we've seen from Republicans since 2016. Now, I want to mention first and foremost that 2024 is not going to be anything like 2016. This is going to be an open primary. Trump does have the advantage, but I don't think Trump is going to have the same strategy he did in 2016. He's really relying on his hardcore base of supporters, that 30 to 40% of the party that will never leave him, to carry him to victory. And when you have all these other candidates that really have no shot at the nomination, people like Larry Elder, Nikki Haley, Asa Hutchinson, Vivek Ramaswamy, crowding up the field, it gives Trump exactly what he needs, which is a divided field to win the primary. But of course, if you believe current polling as it is today, Trump would win the primary with a majority regardless. But I think it's almost indisputable that these non-Trump candidates are hurting DeSantis, because while DeSantis does appeal to a certain segment of the conservative base, he does also appeal to Republicans that just don't want Trump to be the nominee in 2024. You know, these people backing Tim Scott and Haley and Elder. I'm sure once these people inevitably drop out of the primary, a lot of those voters are probably going to go to Ron DeSantis, because if they're not really on board with Trump already, why would they then jump to Trump when entertaining another candidate early on? I mean, it is possible, but I just think a lot of these non-Trump primary votes would probably go to the only candidate in the race who isn't Trump polling pretty well, and that would probably be Ron DeSantis. But I think we're seeing the strategies playing out in the Republican primary now. You have Donald Trump, who is sort of painting Ron DeSantis as an establishment, quote-unquote, rhino Republican, which I think is a bit of an absurd claim considering DeSantis is one of the most conservative Republicans currently in the party. But, you know, he's attacking him as this sort of establishment figure, somebody who's inexperienced, somebody who's a backstabber against Donald Trump. And, you know, so far that message is resonating. I mean, Trump has been hammering DeSantis for months and months and months. And all DeSantis has really done is make maybe the slight potshot attack every now and then. But DeSantis really hasn't directly attacked Trump. I mean, I don't even know of an attack where DeSantis actually directly named Donald Trump, even when Trump was lobbing some very vicious attacks against him. So if Ron DeSantis wants to win this primary, he needs to go gloves off, very aggressive against Donald Trump. And, the pot shots are a little bit of a preview, but he needs to go very aggressive against Trump on issues Republicans actually care about. If he's going to Trump's left on issues of Ukraine and January 6th and all that stuff, that's not going to resonate with the Republican electorate. Ron DeSantis needs to be smart about the issues he actually goes after Trump on. And, as this CNN article points out, he's already starting to angle himself as to the right of Trump on abortions and guns, Social Security entitlements and things like that, the latter of which I think won't really be popular in a general. And in some cases, I think Trump's very misleading in how he categorizes DeSantis's position. But nonetheless, there is this stigma against DeSantis that he is very much this establishment, old guard Republican. And, that's something that is very toxic in the Republican base as of now, because Trumpism is still the majority ideology in the Trump base. And it's not exactly a conservative ideology. It's a hodgepodge of these very nationalist and, in some cases, ideologically elusive positions that ultimately make up sort of the majority of the base's thinking. And really, the base's thinking is around Donald Trump at this moment. So if Ron DeSantis wants any hope at beating Trump, he obviously has to go aggressive against him, but he also needs to craft his own image. And I think that's something he's starting to do as of recently, but he can't play Trump's own game in the primary because it's not going to work. You can't out-Trump Trump. And if Republicans see Ron DeSantis as the diet Donald Trump, he's not going to win the primary. He needs to be Ron DeSantis and not diet Donald Trump, as we saw a lot of other Republican contenders try to do in the 2016 primaries to no avail. So again, the primary, obviously, Trump is heavily, heavily favored at this time. Again, I'm not going to rush to judgment as other commentators are, especially in Trump world, saying this primary is over. Donald Trump's going to win no matter what, especially given the fact that it's May of 2023. But yes, it's very likely that Donald Trump is going to win the primary. I think that's indisputable, especially with the facts given. But DeSantis certainly does have a path. He needs to play his cards right. He really needs the stars to align. And for Trump to really falter on his own, or some sort of big scandal to hurt Donald Trump, he really needs just everything to come together in order to win this primary. And while I think it's possible, as of right now, Trump is definitely the heavy favorite, given all the polling data we have at the moment. Now, looking ahead a little bit to the general election, if DeSantis were to be the nominee, I think he would have a much easier time against Biden, because DeSantis is not somebody most Americans have a opinion of one way or the other. Mainstream non-political Americans really don't know a whole lot about Ron DeSantis. They obviously know a lot about Donald Trump, and they obviously know a lot about Biden. And I think for 99% of voters, their minds are already made up about those two candidates. But I think where DeSantis has a unique strength is that he still has a lot of voters he can win over to his side, because he really hasn't been crafted this image on the national stage yet. And I certainly think that's going to help him in the Sun Belt particularly, but it could even help him in some of the Rust Belt areas, particularly in the suburbs where Republicans have been lacking quite heavily as of late. And if we take a look at this map, which fills in all of these states that are basically going to go Republican or Democrat either way, you've really got the toss-up states that are just that, toss-ups. And honestly, we could even throw in New Hampshire as a Democratic state, since I think it's pretty likely that Biden's going to win it. But you still have these 7 states that are really up for grabs. Either candidate could win these states. Now, of course, if you want to narrow it down based on likelihood, I think Biden's most likely to win Michigan, but Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada are still very much in that toss-up category. You've also got Nebraska's 2nd district. So areas I think DeSantis would do very well, Arizona and Georgia. Georgia particularly, since it is not just the neighbor of Florida, but it also has a very similar culture to Florida. It has a high amount of evangelicals. Obviously, Florida has a bit less, but it's still a southern state. The suburbs there are much more friendly to non-Trump Republicans, as we saw in 2022. Brian Kemp, Brad Raffensperger, even the down-ballot candidates, some of which were a little bit Trumpy, but they really didn't get much attention. They did fairly well. All the Republicans not named Donald Trump or Herschel Walker did very well in 2022, and I think Herschel Walker had a lot of his own problems, but also his connection to Trump in Georgia certainly didn't help him. But I think Georgia's probably the easiest state that Ron DeSantis could pick up. Arizona, I certainly think he has a chance as well. He could probably win Maricopa County narrowly, which would ultimately give him the state. Another state I think Ron would do very well is North Carolina. Again, another southern state, but demographically I think is favorable to Republicans. Trump could win it in 2024. I don't think it's as likely But I think DeSantis would probably be able to win North Carolina by a couple of points at this point in time. Again, a lot could change. The Rust Belt, you could argue DeSantis does have a bit of a weakness, but DeSantis does actually have Midwestern roots. I believe his mom is from either Eastern Ohio or Western Pennsylvania. So he did sort of had a Midwestern cultural upbringing in Florida. And I think that some people underestimate that fact about him. But Nevada is probably the other obvious state where I think DeSantis could do very well, could win that state. Nebraska's second, a Republican-leaning suburban area. It's been trending left. He could possibly win it. And then, of course, in order to win the presidency, he would need either Wisconsin or Pennsylvania. And if DeSantis wins Wisconsin, which I think is the most probable pickup both electorally and demographically for him, that would put him at 279, even if he loses Pennsylvania to Joe Biden. It would be a pretty close race, but, this is one of the pathways that DeSantis has. He also could win Pennsylvania very narrowly via the suburbs, doing well enough in the rural areas, but also holding his own in places like Allegheny and the collar counties. Again, the collar counties might be a little difficult because while most suburbs in America I would categorize as more center-right leaning, I think those suburbs are a little bit more center-left leaning. They've been blue since the Clinton years, whereas a lot of other suburban areas have been really only bluish, post-2008, really. And in some cases down ballot, they tend to still be a bit redder. The Philly suburbs are redder down ballot, but it's more so for, treasurer, state auditor, things like that. The minor financial races where you have some Democrats or some former Republicans, I should say, that are now Democrats that are still comfortable voting for, Republicans on the fiscal issues. And, those are areas I think that are going to be a bit tougher for DeSantis. But I think the Sun Belt would certainly be a lot easier, Nevada especially. I think his main problem would be, of course, the Rust Belt. I think many people have highlighted this, but I think the Rust Belt would also be a huge problem for Donald Trump because we saw his candidates do very poorly there. Tudor Dixon, Doug Mastriano, Tim Michaels all performed very poorly in a year Republicans were supposed to do well. So I think the moral of the story for 2024 is that whether it's Trump or DeSantis, it's going to be an uphill battle. I just think with somebody like Donald Trump, it's more of an uphill battle. I think Republicans would be wise to nominate DeSantis because of his electability, but also because of his solid conservative credentials. And, some could argue he's somebody that could serve 2 terms as president as opposed to 1. There's a number of advantages to nominating DeSantis over Trump. I think the real crucial question in this primary is whether or not the Republican base is ready to move on from Donald Trump. And so far, as the polling indicates, they're not. But again, there's a lot of time for this to change. It very well could happen, but obviously the data points currently to a pretty big win for Donald Trump in the Republican primary. So anyway, that's it for today's video. Please leave a thumbs up down below, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification so you don't miss any more videos I put out. As always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.